Well, thanks for joining me, Matt. We chatted a little before we started, and I figure we'll just jump in. It's 2024 June, and everybody thought the market would be probably better than it has been now. But it's funny, I was just reading some stats on Altus Group, which does a lot of commercial real estate stats in terms of like, what's going on. And basically, I thought this was interesting. They said that the Q1 of 2024 is the lowest transaction volume since 2013, which is
Wow.
wild.
Yeah,
I had no
that's
idea.
really interesting.
So how's it going with you? Because you do industrial up in the Puget Sound area, right? Up in Washington.
That's right.
Tell me what's going on right now.
It's definitely different, right? I mean, we're all living this, and we were riding an all-time high probably from 2017 all the way through end of 21. So it's kind of 4 years of just going a million miles an hour and record property values, rising rents. I mean, everything, record transaction volumes. I mean, it was just crazy, and it was great. And then as soon as interest rates started rising, shocker, the party kind of stopped. Actually, all things considered, I'd argue that the market's still in a pretty, I'd say it's healthy, right? It's definitely
like
not on, it's not on rocket fuel like it used to be. I hear that stat you just mentioned, and while that's surprising to hear, when you think about it, it's not that surprising in practice. I mean, 23 felt like a really slow transaction year, and 24 already is off to the same start as 23, and per that stat, arguably worse. And we've been looking, I mean, the big question everyone keeps asking is, when's the bottom? Are we at the bottom? When is the bottom, right? And everyone wants to believe that it's, and optimistically so, wants it to be sooner rather than later, naturally. I can't see a world where we're not still living in this in 2025. I mean, we're going into the end of the year. There's an election coming up. The economy hasn't still, call it, recorrected itself to a level that the Fed wants, even if they drop rate. I mean, everyone's waiting for these huge rate drops, right? They're not going to be big. I mean, even if we drop rates, anybody who tries to predict interest rates, I think, is reaching. But if you subscribe to what's being discussed out there, we might see some drops this year. If we see some drops, I mean, what are they going to be? 25 basis points, 50 basis points? I mean, not enough to move the needle. So I think we're just going to keep riding this wave that we're on for a while. And Seattle's experiencing that. Seattle's interesting in that we're a coastal market. We're a West Coast market. There's a lot of investment dollars that are here now and continue to want to be here. So I like to think that we've been probably better insulated to what's going on in the macro economy and really the more specifically the macro commercial real estate world out there. So we're still seeing things get done. We're not seeing huge falls off the cliff related to pricing or lease rates dropping. I mean, we're seeing it, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's just kind of weathering the storm and figuring out the new normal, which I think we're finally getting there after I mean, if you think about it, we've been living in this kind of new environment for the better part of almost 2 years now. So it's becoming normal.
Don't say new normal, because that takes me back to the pandemic. Like, I can't hear those words.
Oh gosh. Yeah. That's a good point when you put it that way.
No, that's good. Do you do leasing and sales? I mean, I think most industrial brokers do, right?
Yeah, I do leasing. Yeah. I do sales. I limit my niche to industrial, but within industrial, I'll do just about everything: leasing, sales, development, investment transactions, management for my clients. And then even within industrial, I mean, it's distribution warehouse buildings, manufacturing facilities, IOS, which is industrial outside storage. Think parking lots, truck lots, storage of materials outdoors. I mean, really anything. We have 2 major ports here in Seattle. So, I mean, there's a lot of industrial activity and a wide range of different types of industrial properties and clients and transactions to work on. So, yeah, I mean, it keeps me plenty busy.
Yeah, I think of industrial, like I used to sell multifamily buildings, and we saw a lot of trades that would come back. So you'd sell the same building like 3 or 4 times in a period. Right. I mean, especially in the last 10 years, it would happen a couple times. I would imagine with industrial, that's similar with the leasing, right? So you have the sale, maybe then you get the leasing assignment. So you're getting multiple fees on one potential property. Is that kind of right? Or
it's pretty typical. It depends on the type of sale, but yeah, generally, like, especially if we're talking institutional money coming into the market, they usually like to buy property. They usually hire, after I sell it to them, they'll usually hire me to manage the leasing. I'll do that for whatever their preferred hold period is, 3-5-ish years. And then
Yeah.
they sell the asset, rinse and repeat. And similarly, so, I mean, tenants are usually signing 3, 5, sometimes up to 7 and 10-year leases, but those leases expire. And assuming you did your job and did it well the first time, usually you have an at bat to do it again every 3 to 5-ish years. So it's really you need to build the book of business and you need to maintain it, but you have predictable roles as it relates to predicting when some transactions are going to come in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple different ways we could take this, but I want to stay on this topic real quick of the transaction volume. I think you made a good point. I mean, it definitely feels like a healthy market. I mean, I sell mobile home parks and RV parks, and there's a number of transactions happening. I think most of it's off market, which we've noticed a bigger increase in that. But I would say people are just being more creative. I mean, we're seeing more seller financing. It's interesting. 2023, I'm looking at these stats and, these are, I'd have to go in and see exactly what these are, but Q1 of 24 is significantly lower than Q1 of 2023, which felt pretty slow last year this time. So it is a little bit surprising. Now, this is generally across the country. I think you made a good point too. We're a little bit insulated in the West Coast because our real estate's just different than the Midwest or the North Plains and things like that. So when I talk to people about parks, we generally don't go anywhere outside of the West Coast because it's just different markets. Like
Totally.
you can't compare a park in South Carolina to one in, King County, Washington, So
yeah, different dynamics for sure.
Totally. Okay, so on industrial, I wanted to kind of focus on this. I think one of the things that we hear is like leasing versus sales. Like, how did you decide to get into industrial? Maybe just give us like a quick background in terms of how you got into commercial real estate without spending too much time. But like, why'd you pick industrial? What do you think that has the advantage over another asset class? Maybe just people that are listening and thinking about it.
Yeah, great question. I'll preface this by saying I kind of just fell into it, and by all measures, I'd consider that lucky. I worked for a wine distributor, and I had a bunch of sales and management roles within the wine and spirits industry. It was great, loved it, cool company, cool business. I had friends that worked for Kidder Matthews, and so I was hearing about commercial real estate. I think for a lot of people, if you're not in commercial real estate, you don't know a lot about it, or don't. If you're not exposed to it, it's very mysterious, right?
Totally.
And so I started getting exposed to it, and I was like, wow, this sounds really interesting. And I was young and, still not married yet at the time. And I just was kind of looking at, it felt right to make a career pivot, and I was good at selling wine. So I thought I could be good at selling buildings. So I did that. But when it came to getting into commercial real estate, I just wanted to get in. And so I happened to meet with a couple different brokers, two of which did industrial, leasing, sales, that whole gamut. And, they were interesting. I thought we made a good team, a good dynamic. So I just kind of went with it. I didn't, I thought about office. I thought about multifamily. I hate to even put it this way, but really simply put, when I thought, I'm like, is industrial the right product type? I was like, gosh, I order stuff from Amazon every day, and that stuff's all in warehouses. And so I don't think that's going away. So I was like, you know what, let's do it. Right. So I kind of I just went with it. Multifamily was probably my close second, but I just didn't, the industrial thing fell into place. And then, here I am, whatever it's been, 8 years later. And I'd say it was definitely the right choice.
Good move. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Multifamily seems to be like the first pick for most people because it's just like the shiny, it's been like the darling the last 10 years.
Totally.
Although I would say industrial seems to be the new darling of commercial real estate. How old were you when you got in?
I was 26, I think, when I started.
Yeah. Definitely helps to not be married and have kids when you start.
I did get married like 2 months after I started, and then I had kids a couple of years later. So I didn't waste any time. And those first, especially in brokerage, those first years, they're just, it's a grind. Famine, working your butt off, grind. It was a tough go there for a while, and then things start to click. And fortunately, I made some right decisions and got in the right place at the right time, and eventually things worked out. But yeah, it was had to get there.
That's cool. You said like commercial real estate was mysterious. I agree with you because before I was in it, everybody hears about residential, but it's like
Hmm.
commercial real estate. What do they actually do? Did you say that you had some friends tell you about it, or you just like what was how did you discover it again? Like what was that catalyst?
I had friends that, like, for example, I'd just be, hanging out on the weekends with, and I knew they worked in commercial real estate.
Hmm.
And then some, at some point or another, that became them probably talking about work in front of me, and then me being curious and asking questions. And
Yeah.
so that
Okay.
was, to your point, you drive around, you understand that there's commercial buildings, but, like, I mean, here's the best example. This is a question I always ask everybody not in commercial real estate. Do you notice leasing and sales signs in front of commercial properties when you're driving around town? I, for one, didn't. I mean, they're everywhere, and my brain is trained to see them. They're everywhere. I didn't even notice them
Yeah.
before I got into this industry. It's like, because I just didn't know what it was, and I just, the eyes would dart right past it as I'm driving down the road.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's your good example. And so, yeah, I just kind of got exposed to it, and then decided to dig deeper.
Yeah. I always tell people I never wanted to sell houses because A, I didn't want to work on the weekends, and
Hmm.
B, like definitely didn't want to deal with somebody making an emotional decision over whether to buy something. I would say it's kind of funny because I mean, we still deal with clients where they get emotional, but it's probably
Oh,
less so,
big time.
right?
It's less, it's like less personal emotion, because
Yeah.
you're like, especially for me, most of my clients are businesses, but
Yep.
that doesn't mean the individual isn't still emotional.
For
I
sure.
love what you said there, because I thought the same thing. Less emotional people and not working weekends. I'll tell you what, I still work weekends all the time. 8 years in. I'm
Well,
not like hosting open houses and
that's
doing
what I
that kind of
mean. Yeah.
stuff. Totally right, and it's
Yeah.
not appointment driven. It's just getting work done over the weekends. But and still deal with emotional individuals. I just met with somebody last week who's interested in getting into commercial brokerage, who's currently in residential brokerage, and that was their two comments. Like, I don't want to work weekends, and I don't really like the client type in residential. I said, it'll be better with commercial, but you're not getting away from it. I'm just warning you right now. So
Yeah. Well,
there's a
and
little
good
bit of a
point. Like
misconception there.
100%. We definitely have worked weekends. I mean, certainly over the career, but I think about open houses and I'm like, gosh, that just sounds
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah, Saturday 10 to 2. You got kids. You're not.
Bringing like
You got to plan your whole day around that. I mean, it's
totally.
definitely not ideal.
Yeah. All right. So industrial, what do you think the runway is for industrial? I mean, obviously you made the comment about Amazon. Nobody's going to stop ordering packages. I mean, I can't tell you how many packages I see at my door every single week, but
Yep.
I feel like, and I heard this comment recently, I think it was like this week. It seems like it might be slowing down a little bit because it's been on a rampage for the last few years. Like
Hmm.
everybody wants to get in industrial. Do you feel that slowing, or do you think prices are like sort of reaching a peak? And I don't know if that has anything to do with the market or just in general, but what's your sense about the runway?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel the runway. I feel we still have a lot of runway. I'll start with that.
Hmm.
We were coming out of the best probably time to start would be the Great Recession, and when we started to come out of that, and pick your year, 11, 12, or whatever it was.
Hmm.
And for industrial specifically, that started to, we were kind of on just like a steady rising curve. And then probably about 17, at least here in Seattle, pick your market, it was a little bit different, but around like 2017, the curve started to inflect and kind of go up at a higher clip. And then really pandemic hit, everyone panicked for 3 months. And then, I mean, I remember specifically for about 90 days, I was sitting there going, I don't know what's happening. This isn't good. What's the future? What am I going to do? Right. And then after about 90 days, it was like, okay, we got this figured out. And then next thing you know, it was like, not only do we have this figured out, run. And
Hmm.
from June of 20 through February of 22, I mean, almost a solid 2 years. I mean, it was just bonkers.
Hmm.
And then interest rates slowed it down. So I'd say we inflected, we're flattening out. And then, I think we're going to sit here flat for a little bit with kind of bumps up and down for
Hmm.
the better part of another probably year, maybe two. But the future outlook on industrial for in a couple senses. One, institutional and money, Wall Street wanting to buy industrial, that's not going away anytime soon. I mean, there's
Yeah.
billions of dollars sitting on the sidelines wanting to invest in industrial. Meanwhile, you think about dynamics of life. E-commerce is the biggest driver of industrial. That was the biggest contributor to this huge ramp up that we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody would agree to the point you made. E-commerce isn't going away, and it's really not
Mm-hmm.
slowing down. People are just ordering more and more online, and more companies who even haven't been online are figuring out how to get
Mm-hmm.
online.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even ordering just stuff anymore. It's groceries. We're getting services provided on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just there's no, and really, because then you don't necessarily need forward facing commercial real estate. You're moving traditional commercial real estate into an industrial capacity that can be off the beaten path, doesn't have to look pretty. It's generally cheaper than running retail or office. And so I think the runway's long. I just can't see fundamentally. The fundamentals are so strong. So I just can't see why it would slow down anytime.
Yeah.
I mean, it could, I think we'll ebb and flow naturally,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe in it long term. I mean, I invest on the side, and I'm investing my personal money into buying industrial real estate. I've thought about multifamily. I've thought about office, not necessarily suggesting I would never do those types of transactions, but to date, I've put all my money in industrial properties. I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, that's cool. What's your favorite part or specific industrial product, I guess?
I
Property?
think for me personally, iOS, which for those that don't
Mm-hmm.
know, it stands for industrial outside storage.
Mm-hmm.
And I love those properties because they're so simple. If you think about it, it's essentially a parking lot
Mm-hmm.
to dumb it down to its most basic form. Now, there's a lot of different types of parking lots and different functions they can provide. But generally speaking, especially around here, it's a paved or a graveled lot that's usually fenced. It's ideally close to a freeway. It's of decent size acreage, and it may or may not have a building on it. In a perfect world, it has, a little office and a little kind of shop warehouse building on it. I have a couple that just have houses that have been residential homes that have been upzoned to industrial, and then we converted the houses to office. And I've worked on a ton of properties that don't have any improvements on them whatsoever. They're just gravel with fence, and you can usually lease them out to one tenant or maybe two or three if you need to. But call it a single tenant. It's a triple net lease. Tenant pays taxes and insurance and all the maintenance of the property. My only obligation as the owner really is when I have to re-tenant the property. There's costs and time that come with that. And then really, I mean, the upkeep on the property, fixing some fence here and there, putting some new gravel down. I mean, it's really easy, and it's cheap. Cheap relatively speaking, right? I mean, compared to if you have to put a new roof on a big building, I mean, that's a huge capital expenditure versus throwing new gravel down. So I love it.
When you say cheap, are you talking about operating costs or cheap to
Yes.
get into it? Okay.
Yeah, definitely not cheap to get into it necessarily. I mean, really, you're buying property on land pricing. So generally speaking, it's cheaper than buying improved buildings, in my opinion. So cheaper to get into it, but definitely not cheap. But yeah, to your point, the operating costs are much less than what you would typically expect on a improved building.
Do you have management for that or no?
I do. I would say most people could probably self-manage, but with the number of properties that I'm involved in, and fortunately through my company, Kidder Matthews, we have internal management. So for me, it was really easy to hire professional management, mostly to just do the books and deal with the tenants when they have questions and whatnot. Which really the tenants, it's not like they're calling me every week with some problem on the property. It's once in a blue moon. And fortunately, like via triple net leases, I mean, you can hire professional management and you bill it back to your tenants. So I get my property managed, which frees up my time, and I don't even have to pay for the management. I mean, it's a total win-win.
It's amazing. I've been interested in this specific asset class, iOS, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a multifamily guy. I invest in multifamily and parks again, because that's what I know, right?
Sure.
It's kind of like you investing in what you know. There's some people out there that think that there's sort of a conflict of interest with that. I disagree. I just think that, the reality is, as long as you're disclosing your broker and you're involved, it's, like they can choose to sell whoever they want to
Totally.
whoever they want to. But iOS is interesting. I think that, like, how do you value that? Are you looking at cap rates? What is, just give me like some metrics that you would look at in terms of how to value that kind of a deal. And then,
Great question.
and then long-term leases. You didn't say how long those leases are, I think, too.
So typically, probably 3 to 5 year leases. We'll sometimes do shorter, but 3 to 5 is kind of the sweet spot. The easiest way to value it is on a price per square foot on the land itself,
Okay.
and I think it's really subject to the utility that the property provides. So if it's in a better location, higher price per square foot. If it has some kind of building improvements, whether that be office, small warehouse, or combo of the two, higher price per square foot. Um, and so it's pretty variable. And then the other way to back into it from a cap rate kind of standpoint is what are you underwriting your rents, and then based on that, what I usually like to do is, okay, what do I think the fair purchase price is, regardless of rent and cap rate? Just what is the price for this property, the underlying value,
The land.
yeah, of the land.
Mm-hmm.
What can I generate from rent on it? What's my call it cap rate return after
Mm-hmm.
all my acquisition and stabilization costs? And I kind of have a minimum, return threshold that I try to hit, but I focus more on the underlying value first before I look at return. I'm a long-term holder, so I anticipate in the short term, I'd give up a little bit of return if I'm getting in at a really good basis and a good price. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's simple, but that is kind of the general way you look at it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what real estate you're buying, it's always important to evaluate the dirt and the
Yes,
location of the dirt, because the reality is no matter what kind of tenant you have that's providing the income, they could go away, right? And
totally.
so I would say like mobile home parks, I'd probably say is the most stable with regard to that. But for you, you're buying the dirt, and then you're hoping that you can rent it.
Yes.
Future may change. So yeah, good point. It's evaluate the dirt. In terms of oh, I was going to ask, is it financeable?
Generally, yes. It's a little tougher than financing buildings.
Yeah.
It's especially easier when you have tenants. So, like for me, I like to buy vacant properties that have work, classic value add. Like they need work, they need money spent on them. So I
Mhm.
get them at a lower basis because they have problems. I go in, I fix the problems, I rent it to a tenant. Once I have a stabilized tenant paying rent, and I can go take that lease to the bank, I get financing, pull my money back out, rinse and repeat.
Yeah, that's great.
Although a hell of a lot harder today with interest rates where they
Yeah,
are versus where they were before.
we might not get as much money out as we hoped.
Yeah, there were two properties that I worked on that was the model, and when it came time to pull the money out and go get financing, that was right when interest rates started rising,
Mhm.
and so we I mean, admittedly made the mistake of sitting and saying, hey, let's see how this plays out. They're starting to rise. Maybe this, let's hang tight and just see how this plays out. And then the longer we waited, the worse it got. And so actually on those two deals specifically, we had the basis to buy them all cash, which is what we did. And we're still into it all cash. We haven't put financing on them because we're just, it's working at the present
Mhm.
moment. I don't need the cash to pull out. I imagine I will here soon in the immediate future, but for the moment, it's been fine.
How do you balance that with brokerage, right? Because that's one thing I've struggled with is, I got into brokerage to be an owner. I mean, that's just why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you get in and then being successful in brokerage, obviously you can generate pretty good income. The challenge becomes when you start to take your eye off brokerage because you're managing properties, or maybe you're not managing, but you're focused on acquiring assets, and then you form partnerships. Sounds like you've got partnerships, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I know that whole game, like multiple partnerships, just managing those partnerships can be a pain and just a lot of work in and of itself. I mean, how do you manage that? And what's your advice to somebody else that, because a lot of guys don't own real estate, a lot of commercial real estate
Totally.
brokers, which is surprising to
Most
me. I know,
most don't own. Yeah,
wild. It's wild.
it
But
is wild.
what would you say to that, just in general?
On great question. A lot of different thoughts there.
Mhm.
I'd say generally, so you brought up earlier the kind of conflict of interest conversation, which I have with a
Mhm.
lot of my clients, and I know for a fact I'm a better broker because I own property,
100%.
and I can wear the same hat that my clients wear. I've
Yep.
been in situations where my tenant midnight moves on me and I've got to figure it out. My cash flow just went away. I have to figure that out. I have, fundamental problems with my properties that I have to fix. So
Mhm.
that alone, I think is very beneficial, insightful, and helps me with my clients. I still, I mean, the brokerage activity is what steers the ship, and that is my source of income. I'm at a point, and this will probably change over time. I hope it changes over time, but I'm not relying whatsoever on my rental property income. I mean, that's just gravy on top at the moment. I still have my head down focusing on brokerage, and that's my plan for the foreseeable future. So I've built systems. I mentioned that, like, I have professional property management, I have partners, and I have a dedicated client services coordinator that works on my team that helps me not only with my brokerage, but can help with my investment properties on the back end too. So
Mm-hmm.
I've intentionally spent time and money building systems to take care of the management of that on the back and make it as least intensive as possible,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can focus on brokerage, focus on my clients, because my brokerage business is crazy busy. I've got a full plate and more, so I really do need to keep my eye on the ball for brokerage. Naturally, I'm always looking for investment deals. I'm spending time working on investment deals, but I figured out a system that doesn't. It's not a time suck at this
Yeah,
point.
that's key. That's
Yeah.
key. Having systems, setting up partners, hiring people to do the stuff that you can't do,
Yes.
and or the stuff that's probably not worth you doing. That's all key. I think your point about being a better broker because you own is so spot on. I mean, having real operational knowledge to give somebody or advice to give somebody is a huge competitive advantage because if you don't own the product you're selling, it's really hard to give advice. I mean, anybody can
Totally.
like be like, "Oh yeah, that's probably worth X," but to really be able to advise somebody and call yourself an advisor, you kind of need to know the ins and the outs of the asset that you're selling. I think it just
Mhm.
makes you more well-rounded and knowledgeable.
I
So,
couldn't agree more. And the biggest thing is, like, I mean, I just had this question last week where a client said, like, "Hey, aren't you and I are competing for the same deal?" And I said, "Actually, we're not,
not
because
really.
I have a very, while you could argue we're playing in the same pool. I have a very specific set of criteria that I need met to meet my own investment goals. And as long as I've been doing this, I've rarely come across any of my clients who have the exact same criteria as me. So there, and frankly, also, I mean, compared to a lot of my clients, I'd consider myself quote unquote small time. So there's a lot of deals that I'll look at a deal and I'm like, God, I love this deal. I'd love to buy that.
Too
Can't
big.
afford it. Or it does. Yeah, it's too big. Doesn't make sense for me.
Right. Right.
That happens probably more often than anything. So, I don't really actually feel a 9.9 times out of 10, I'm not really competing with my clients. And,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's not an
There's so
issue.
many deals out there. It's like at the end of the day,
Totally.
like it's an abundance mindset, right? I mean,
Yes.
there's another deal just waiting around the corner. So let's
Yep.
switch to tactical stuff because I really like to focus on tactical brokerage stuff, which done some coaching here and there, and I really enjoy that side of it. And talking about different things in broker, what makes a good broker. Tell us just a little bit about like what your routine is, if you have a routine or if you don't, and maybe give us some of that insight into what you do that kind of keeps you sharp.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I'm insanely routine driven, both in my personal life and in my brokerage career, and I think that's incredibly important. If you look at the typical broker, and this is throwing brokers under the bus, myself included, I guess, but um, not very organized. I don't think it's a profession that just draws a lot of people who are there. There are a lot of people that are insanely organized, but I run into so many brokers who, frankly, are very successful and are unbelievably unorganized.
Unorganized, yeah.
And meanwhile, brokerage as an industry, especially commercial brokerage versus residential, is very archaic, very resistant to change. There's a lot of people doing things in insanely inefficient ways. So
Mhm.
I've gone out of my way and spent considerable time trying to fix that and build systems that help me be. I'm a pretty naturally organized person, but when you're working on, I usually do anywhere from, call it, 25 to 45 transactions every year. And to complete that amount of transactions, I have a pretty large client base. So it's a lot of relationships to manage, a lot of time spent communicating with individuals, a lot of time spent on transactions. So I live and die by my calendar. try to be very deliberate about how I book my time, both doing, brokerage, business development activities, working on active transactions, touring property, doing market development, whatever it is. I mentioned I have a full-time admin. She sits in my office. She's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
She helps me keep up with a lot of the back of house work that's required so that I can spend more time with my clients and talking to my clients. I use a lot.
Is that
Yeah, go ahead.
admin just for you? Are
Just
you?
for me.
That's
Yep. I pay her salary. I pay her benefits.
I should have done that years ago.
I just did it. I'm a year into it now. And to your point, I'm can't
Game changer.
believe I didn't start. Yeah. I can't believe I didn't start it sooner.
Yeah.
It's already at the point where I'm like, how did I do this before? Like, I can't figure it out.
I know.
So
I would imagine.
it's brokerage in general too. I'd say brokers, because we live and die by our commissions and we're 100% commission based. We're very guilty of generally spending money and spending money on things that help our business and in general. And I kind of woke up a couple of years ago and decided I was going to do the opposite. I'm going to spend the money required to make my business more efficient, free up more time, and let me focus on the things that I'm good at. And I had a mentor early on that said, hey, your key to brokerage, figure out what you're good at, figure out what you're not good at, and surround yourself with the people that are good at the things that you are not good at.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be great. Right.
Yeah.
And so I've spent a lot of money on software. I pay an admin, all things that at the end of the day, really, it all boils down to one thing, which is providing better service to my clients. And I know if I'm providing good service to my clients, the brokerage income will come, the opportunities will come. It's not rocket science, really. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money, but it works. And I'm really happy with it.
When you said you were talking about spending money, did you mean that generally most brokers don't spend a lot of money? Is that what you were saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, like you can,
Okay.
these days you can buy a ton
Brokers
of different
are cheap.
software systems. Yeah. Brokers are cheap. You can
Super
spend
cheap.
money on, additional listing exposures. You can different MLS systems you can get out there. I mean, there's a million opportunities to spend money, and you have to be careful and be diligent about it.
Mm-hmm.
But most don't. I do. It's worth it. I promise.
Yeah, 100%. I'm in the same boat. I've always been more on the, if it makes sense, let's get it.
Yes.
Because yeah, I mean, if you make your business more efficient, you're going to generate more revenue. Like that's the key. And if you try to do it all yourself, you're going to end up spending time on stuff that doesn't pay very well. And yeah, I don't know why brokers are cheap. Maybe it's the scarcity mindset of like, hey, when's my next paycheck coming? Which leads you to like want to hold, what you have close. So,
Yep.
When I talked to Gellner, I mean, Gellner is a obviously broker at Kidder, and he is like religious about cold calling. So he blocks out, I think, like, I forget what he said, but 9 to 12 or 10 to 12 or something every single day. That's the time he's doing that. I mean, how important do you think that cold calling is to your business? And what would you say to somebody that's just getting started in this industry?
Cold calling is 100% the fastest way to achieve success in this business. Mm-hmm. I probably spent, my first 3-4 years in the business, I would spend if I was working a 10-hour day, I probably spent at least 5, if not more, of those hours every single day exclusively cold calling. Mm-hmm. And then really spending the other hours split between working on transactions, but more so doing the business development, finding the people that I was going to call, later that week. Right. I'm still on the phone every day. I still make cold calls every day. Mm-hmm. Fortunately for me, given the book of business I've built, there's less of that required than I don't have to cold call 5+ hours a day anymore. But I still do. And I still believe, of every activity that I do that generates new business, I think cold calling is probably the most fruitful. Mm-hmm. And so it's especially for new brokers, if you just got to put your game face on, figure out how to get kicked in the teeth, take no, keep going, and also do it efficiently. And if you can crack that code and crack it early, you're going to succeed significantly faster than your peers who don't do it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the only way you learn how to cold call is by doing it. We can go over theory all day long. And I've told guys this, but it's a quantity game in the beginning. It's not quality, because nobody's really good at cold calling in the beginning. And what you do is you sort of find your voice. Like, remember, there's a bunch of different training out there. Marcus Millichap's very good, but the reality is everybody has a different style. And I always told people, like, you have to be your authentic self on the phone. Don't try to
Yep.
follow a script, because if it's not you, the person on the other end is going to see that, or they're going to hear that. And it's just not going to come through as well. So if you are more of a casual guy, be casual. If you're more of like a formal guy, or however you want to do it, you've just got to find that. And the only way you do that is by picking up the phone and dialing. So couldn't agree more
Yep.
on that.
Yep. I'm with you.
What do you think about social media? I mean, obviously you and I have talked about social media because you're doing it. It's something I've found success in. I think more brokers are starting to wake up and realize that it's a value add. Do you ever feel like at some point it's going to be um, the primary source of business for people, or, and maybe it won't, but I mean, how important do you think social media is, and how important do you think it is for brokers to jump on that train?
Yeah, I would say I was resistant to social media. Like most, I was pretty resistant to it. I actually don't do really any personal social media, and I haven't for many years. I'm just not interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
But for work and for commercial real estate, I think it's really, really important. I think a lot of people don't do it because it takes time and effort, and it's hard to measure, the ROI on it really. But I get a lot of feedback, a lot of exposure. I get business, and I get a lot of comments on what I'm doing on social media.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good platform for me to not only self promote, but also, like, I spend a lot of my time trying to take an altruistic approach to it and educate my, call it my following,
Mm-hmm.
which is consistent of clients, friends, family, people I don't know, through tertiary manners, and trying to, I mean, really, if I boil it down to one thing, it's demystify commercial real estate and what I do, because I think the more people that understand commercial real estate, and especially if I'm the one who can demystify it for them, I'm forever going to be ingrained in their minds, right? So I see that as an internal benefit. As far as the social media being the primary driver of business, I'm skeptical to think that it could happen one day, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime in the near future. At least for me, I work with industrial businesses, and industrial businesses are making, distributing, trucking, doing activities that social media just doesn't really, they, like, for a lot of my clients, social media, they're present on social media and they're realizing they need to be more present, but it's not a driver of their business, and consequently they're not seeking professional help, and frankly always even brokerage help sometimes on social media. For me, it's reaching that audience who has relationships with those said companies, who then they're hanging out on the weekend and going, hey, we need to move our distribution facility, and I don't even know where to start. And they go, you need to call Matt. Matt's the guy that does this. I know Matt. I've been listening to him for years. Like, he's the guy. Call him.
That's cool.
And then there you go. That's how you get the business from it. So I'm
I'm
a big believer in it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you get business from it. I think, if you think about like 20 years from now, think about all that. I mean, our generation, obviously, we sort of grown up with some of it. I mean, I'm came like when I was in college, but think like 20 years from now, all the people that are kind of growing through that phase of social media, and it'll be that much more seasoned.
Yep.
I think at some point everybody's going to be on it to the extent that they've kind of grown up with it. I don't know how to say it, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like,
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Like, and so I think guys like you that are experimenting with it right now and continue that on forward, it's going to be this thing that you're planting now, but like 10 years, 15 years from now, it's going to reap huge benefits, I think, because more people will have eyeballs on it than right now. So,
yep,
I don't know.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, we're almost out of time here. I would say, just if you were somebody who's listening to this, it's like a new broker, maybe they're thinking about getting into brokerage. What would you say to them in terms of just, I don't know, things to think about, maybe some advice just to getting in and grinding through these couple years? I know a lot of brokers are, well, I don't know. I think a lot of brokers are getting out across the country based on the market that we're in right now. And where do you, I mean, give some context there, maybe some advice to somebody who's thinking about either getting in or struggling with being a new broker.
I think one, if you're looking to get into brokerage, do your homework. As somebody who didn't do their homework, I got lucky. And I didn't even really get lucky because I definitely floundered for my first few years. I could have built my system and my base better that would have helped me get ramped up quicker. So do your homework, go meet with as many people in town as you can, interview with different brokerage houses, meet with, if you have friends that are or family members that would like theoretically be potential clients, ask them what it's like, have they worked with brokers and what is that like? Get as many different perspectives as you can so that you go into it eyes wide open, understanding. I think that's a huge one. Naturally, I don't think this isn't unobvious, but you have to know that your early years in brokerage monetarily and financially are going to be really challenging. So the more you can prepare for that will help you withstand the bumps that come along with getting started. Which is, I mean, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and start a business, that's really what you're doing. You're starting a business, right? So of course the first years are tough. Frankly, call me if you're listening to this and you're a new broker or thinking about getting into brokerage. I would love to chat with you. That's awesome. Before I got into brokerage, I worked in management, so I managed sales teams. And if I'm being honest, probably I love the mentorship component of what I used to do, and I still get to do that in my current role, but arguably a lot less since I'm running a individual focused business. So any chance I can get to help somebody, and if it gives them a little bit of a leg up, I love it. And so I think it's just, like I said, I just met with someone last week who's in residential brokerage thinking to get into commercial brokerage. So they understand, they already have a much broader exposure to it than call it somebody coming from the outside. And my instructions to them and my help to them was, you need to tap your network and go meet with them. And by the way, here's 5 people I know. And I don't want to, and I meant this in a joking, nice way, but I said, I don't want to talk to you again until you've already talked and met with those 5 people. And then let's revisit this conversation, and bet you it'll be a different conversation at that point, or you'll have new questions and new thoughts that you and I can talk about. So I just think it's really important to do your homework.
Yeah, that's good advice. I've done that literal same thing where I'm like, hey, these are people you should talk to. Go talk to them. And then if you still have questions, call me back, because you've got to get different perspectives. You have to get some things that you probably don't know what you don't know yet. And I can't be the only one to say, hey, this is what you should do. Like, you have to figure out. And the only way you do that is by going and talking to people.
Yep.
That's awesome, man. What do you think? And just last question off what you just said. We're at a time now with social media and the internet and all these things, 2024, brokerages. I mean, there's been 2 really prominent brokers that left pretty big firms recently within the last few months. Like, I'm sure you know Bob Knackle in New York City.
Yep.
Pretty big on Twitter, and just a super nice guy. But he left Cushman, and he's basically started his own thing. And then I think there's another broker at CBRE who's doing office buildings, Darcy something. But she apparently, I just saw this, she left, and I don't know if she joined her own firm or she started something or joined another firm. But there's a lot of people moving firms. And I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that the big brokerage house is kind of going away? What's your take on that?
I think so many different brokers have different business models and different client bases and what they do that depending on what that looks like, kind of probably can and should dictate what kind of brokerage company you work for, whether that's one of the big firms. My firm, I mean, we're large, but I'd argue we're a boutique firm. We're West Coast based. We're shareholder owned. I'm a shareholder in the company, so we're not publicly traded. But we have a lot of the same capabilities as the big firms. And then you've got solo practitioners that have their own managing broker, and they might be a 1 or 3 man shop, and that's it, right? And there's nothing wrong with any of those models. They actually all have a lot of pros and cons associated with them. So I think it just depends on what you need, what kind of client you're serving, what kind of back of house needs do you have, especially because that's what my brokerage company provides the most for me, is a lot of back of house. It's like the marketing, the management, the admin, research. I mean, my brokerage company has a lot of capabilities that I get a lot of value out of, which is why I'm still here versus call it, starting my own thing per se. So I don't know. I mean, and really, I mean, this, especially when we're in a down cycle, people are switching teams all the time, more so than really ever any other time. So I don't think that'll ever change. I don't really see big brokerages going away. I don't see small brokerages and independent firms. The other component, I mean, a lot of people don't understand this, is depending on where you work. I mean, every commission that brokers get, we give that back to our company in some variable percentage. And typically the bigger firm you work for, the more of your income they take. They generally provide, call it, a higher level of services or exposure to clients, which is why they feel they can charge more, and it's justified. So that's a question you got to ask yourself too, is what kind of business do you want to do, and how much of your income are you willing to give up in order to potentially work in that kind of a model? So it just depends. It's a personal choice.
That's a good answer. Yeah, I battled with that for years. I've been in multiple firms, not by choice, but there's definitely different split structures. And there's always the question, I think, to your point, is like, what are you doing? And that'll dictate where you need to be. Like,
yes,
someone doing data centers is not going to be at a, Keller Williams. They're going to be at a JLL.
Exactly.
Or BRE.
Exactly.
But if you're selling multifamily, you can do that pretty much anywhere. And then the brand becomes, I've always felt like the brand is more the broker than the firm, because people remember the broker. They don't necessarily remember the firm. And I've experienced this when I've moved. It doesn't really matter what flag I have behind me. People care where, like, hey, what are you doing? I want to go with you. And so,
yes.
But there are certain things like capital markets, you got to be at a big shop if you're going to do some institutional stuff in that place. So.
Yep.
Cool, man.
Yeah. I mean, I get business from my firm, but the majority of my business is self-developed. So there you go.
And you guys, I mean, your firm has great splits. So you guys got good deal. So Matt, really appreciate you coming on, man. It's good to chat with you. And we'll link to your LinkedIn. Do you have your contact info on that, or did you want to share? I mean,
yeah, I'd say I'm probably the most active on LinkedIn. You can easily get in touch with me there. My website, which is McLennanindustrial.com. That's my last name, industrial.com. That has everything. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet and get in touch with. So you can find me anywhere.
Sweet, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and have a good rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Let's do it again.
For sure.